Good day and welcome to the IEEE Computer Society's presentation on Lessons Learned from Snowden's former NSA boss, Strategies to Protect Your Data by Stephen Bay. My name is Amir Drakis and I will be moderating today's presentation. But before we get started, I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items. You will be able to personalize and enlarge the screen. You can enlarge any tab to its full size by dragging from the bottom right corner, or by clicking the green button on the top right. You can access more information or hide the current tabs using the icons at the bottom of the screen. You can control the volume and playback on the screen of your computer with the media player on the left side of the presentation window. You may also need to adjust the master volume on your computer. At the end of our presentation, we will have time for questions. And as questions occur to you, please type them into the box provided on the left and press the submit button. You do not need to wait until the end of our presentation. If you experience any audio or visual difficulties, please click on the help icon located on the bottom of your screen. If you're not able to resolve the issue, please submit the comment by using the Q&A box. A representative will respond. Now I would like to introduce our speaker for today's webinar. Stephen Bay is the Director of Security Operations and Threat Intelligence at Security on Demand. With over 15 years in cybersecurity, his career has spanned government, enterprise, and consulting services. For a majority of his career, he served as an analyst supporting the NSA via the U.S. Air Force and Booz Allen Hamilton. While at Booz Allen, he served as Edward Snowden's boss just prior to Snowden's flight from the United States. Following his time supporting the agency, he designed and implemented information security programs for Fortune 500 companies and served as CISO. He holds an MBA from Thunderbird School of Global Management and an MA in International Relations from Webster University. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Bay.
Thank you, Amir, and I am thrilled to be here today and to be able to share some of my thoughts and my experiences and hopefully some good things you can take away with you back to your organization to help detect insider threats. As mentioned, I was Snowden's boss when everything kind of went down, so I've been intimately involved in insider threat incidents and events and arguably perhaps the biggest insider threat in U.S. history to some extent. And so there's a lot of things we can learn and a lot of great application that we can take back to our organizations. So we're going to start out today by talking about insider threats and really defining what they are and who they are. So the way we've mapped out insider threats is we've really got 5 profiles of insiders. You've got your disgruntled employees, your spies, your espionage folks, those who are fraudsters. You have your ignorant or kind of careless employees and departing employees. The first 3, your disgruntled spies and fraudsters, those are your malicious insiders. And I think when most people think of insider threats, it kind of fits in that realm, in that domain. Your disgruntled employees are those who have some reason to be angry or upset with your organization, whether it's maybe they got passed over for a promotion, they have a manager or a boss or somebody that they're not very keen on that has treated them poorly, or they feel wronged in some way. Now, it's important to note, if we talk about disgruntled insider threats, and really insiders as a whole, is insider threats are not necessarily in and of themselves a cybersecurity domain. At least it's certainly at a corporate level or organizational level, minimizing risk of insider threats shouldn't be under the CISO or within cybersecurity. They're a significant element to it and an important part of it, but really insider threats should sit at the HR level, because it's an issue of people and it's an issue of motivation. And insider threats also aren't just a data loss issue. You also have a very real physical threat. For example, a little over a year ago, YouTube had an active shooter issue on campus where it was an employee who caused a physical threat and harm to other employees on their campus. And this suggests that insider threats are not just data loss or cybersecurity or hacking, but cause very real physical security elements. So it's important to know that as you as an organization build your insider threat programs, that it's kept at a higher level than just IT and information security. And that will help really drive an effective program for you. So your disgruntled employees are those that serve as a physical cybersecurity, and they really have some sort of motivation for why they're angry, why they're disappointed, why they're going to do what they do. Your spies or espionage, this is something we continue to see a lot of. In fact, just in the last year, there have been numerous reports out there of individuals in the United States getting arrested due to stealing intellectual property on behalf of China in particular, but there's other countries as well. In fact, in one case, the individual that was arrested was only about 2 or 3 months away from moving to China themselves and setting up basically the same company in China that he would then run and own and build, right? And so this is a very big intellectual property theft is one of the primary ways in which China in particular, but again, other countries have built their economy and really closed the gap with the United States, costing U.S. companies billions of dollars annually. So they're really seeking intellectual property, your R&D. They're also there for intelligence, right? So there are espionage issues too, where you're not just losing intellectual property, but there's infiltration of where employees may be recruited by a foreign intelligence service or maybe planted from a foreign intelligence service to develop intelligence, whether it's on a company or within the government or some other organization as well. The next categorization is your fraudsters, people who are driven by greed or financial difficulties. Basically, they're doing it for the money, right? So these are insiders that are there to steal money from you. And in some cases, these are people who have fallen on hard times. Maybe they are having financial difficulties at home, having a hard time making ends meet. Their home is on the verge of getting foreclosed. Maybe they've got huge gambling debts, you name it, right? Other times, people may have lots of money, but they're just really greedy and they think that they deserve more or want more. And so these folks look for ways to be able to steal money from your organization. The next one is a group that I think most of us, I don't want to say overlook, especially in cybersecurity, but I'm surprised to hear that most data breaches occur because of your trusted employees. This is all of us. These are people who have no malicious intent. We're not in the organization to do harm, but maybe we're not paying attention, or we're not trained well enough, or whatever reason. But when that email comes in, that is a fake email that looks legitimate, and we click that email and we infect our networks or systems or cause some sort of data breach, we're technically an insider threat in that regard. We're the ones enabling that data breach. And in the 2017 Verizon DB report, up to 66% of data breaches occurred as a result of phishing or other types of social engineering. And so it's important for organizations to really look at how they do training and awareness events for their organization to ensure that their employees are trained on how do I detect and understand and differentiate phishing emails. And we'll talk about this a little bit later in the presentation. You also have your departing employees. Your departing employees are often overlooked, right? These are people, and most organizations are concerned about departing employees, of course. But these folks are insider threats because they're really potentially stealing data. And there is a small physical security threat from departing employees as well, depending on if they were fired, if they feel, again, kind of like the disgruntled, if they feel like they've been wronged. You do have that threat as well. But for the most part, your departing employee people who are taking data from the organization to give them a leg up in their new role. You take a salesperson who's going to a competing company, and maybe they take their sales list and their contact list and a little bit of intellectual property to take to their new job to give them a leg up. Your developer who develops code or programs or products and feels like a lot of the unique developed and the code they developed really belongs to not the company, and they decided to take that with them. Well, that's all data loss, and that all costs the company money and potentially causes them to lose market share to competitors when those things are used against them. And so we want to have policies in place and procedures in place to minimize the likelihood of those things occurring. Now, where does Snowden fit in all of this? Well, Edward Snowden, to me, really straddles that line between disgruntled and spy. Now, the spy piece is a little less definitive, right? There's an element of, could we classify him in the espionage piece based upon what he later did by releasing all that data out to the public through the media and foreign countries grabbing that information, secret data, and then using that for their operations or to better understand things, right? So that could kind of fit him in the espionage area as well. But certainly he was in the disgruntled space. For those of you who aren't as familiar with the Snowden story, Snowden's stated motivation for what he did centered around the things that he saw at NSA and NSA during his time at each that he believed were abuses perpetrated by the U.S. government against the American people, in that claiming that the United States government was wantonly spying on Americans. And he felt it was his duty, his responsibility to reveal and make it known to the American people whether, that these abuses were occurring. And so he became very disenfranchised with NSA, with U.S. government intelligence operations and procedures, et cetera. So he definitely fits in that disgruntled space. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my story and Snowden as an insider threat. So what we're going to dive into now is just my experience with Snowden and give you some background on what happened with him and with me and how all of that went down. So I met Snowden in February or late January, early February of 2018. And these dates are really interesting to me because they show how quickly something can unravel, right? So Snowden fled to Hong on May 8th. And he revealed himself to the world of that same year. And I didn't even meet him until end of January, early February. And I had a few open positions, and then we did the job interview. Edward was employee referral of mine. One of my employees had met him, had worked with him as Ed leading into this was the systems administrator. And this is another important misconception, is that Snowden was not an intelligence analyst. He had never been an intelligence analyst during his time at CIA or NSA until he joined the team. At NSA, he was a contractor doing systems administrative work. And so there was separation of duties. He never actually was trained or really had hands-on experience with intelligence, which I think caused some of the miscommunication, some of what I view as he gave context to the things that he stole in his releases. He really kind of misinformed or misinterpreted what these things meant and what NSA was doing with the programs he revealed. So I think that's an interesting point, is that he was never an intelligence analyst prior to coming to my team, despite the fact he'd begun planning to do it quite a long time. In fact, he has admitted that he targeted my position and was coached for the resume. So he definitely knew what position he wanted to get. He knew that the position that I had open would give him access to the type of data he was looking for, and so on and so forth. So in the interview, we had a really interesting conversation. Both me and my technical director came away quite impressed with his technical capacity. We were really looking for three primary skill sets. We were looking for somebody who had the top secret security clearance with the full scope polygraph, so we could just get him in quickly and process everything. We were looking for somebody with really strong technical skills, understood the internet and network technologies, understands hacking, understood the foreign cyber threat, right? How do the Chinese hack versus the Russians versus the Iranians versus other groups, right? And could at least speak somewhat intelligently on that. And that wasn't a critical element, but certainly understanding the technology behind all of the cybersecurity risks that are out there was really important. And the third requirement we had was that we needed them to be an intelligence analyst and have experience in that regard. And so when we concluded the interview, it was pretty evident that he didn't have that intel analysis experience. But I had asked some questions to try to gauge his analytic capability. How does he do it, putting different pieces of the puzzle together? What kind of questions does he ask? And he seemed to do really well on that. He impressed us with the technical capacity. There have been a lot of people who tried to denigrate Ed's technical expertise in the past, which I think is a kind of a misservice to us. I think to really understand Snowden, we need to understand that he really was technical. He was an expert in internet anonymization. He was very good on and ran a couple Tor nodes out of his house. If you're familiar with Tor, the anonymization tool, he even claimed to know a couple zero-day vulnerabilities within Tor. So we really felt strongly that despite him not having intelligence analyst experience, that he would be a good fit on the team to come in and work with our cybersecurity partners to help develop intelligence. And so we went through that process of hiring him. He later joined our team on April 1st of 2013. So those first 2 weeks of employment with us, he actually flew out to Maryland, and he spent 2 weeks in Maryland at NSA headquarters doing training. After 2 weeks there, he came back and he joined us in Hawaii. And so it was really only about a month and maybe a week that I actually worked with him closely before he fled the country. About a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks after starting with us, he came. He said, "Hey, Steve, I need to let you know that I've got epilepsy. And the epilepsy is not the kind of epilepsy where I drop down with having seizures or anything like that. It's more I just kind of black out. And I've had it under control for quite a long time, but for whatever reason, the last couple of weeks, it's really been flaring up and it's starting to worry me. So just so you know, I'm going to have to occasionally miss work a few times or come in late for medical appointments. Being the manager and wanting to take care of them, I express my support, my sympathy. So, take the time you need. Let's make sure you're taken care of. And so this is one of the first lessons we learn about insider threats, as I've looked back at my experience with Snowden, is that insiders, in order to often do what they do, especially if they work in a kind of an open environment like we had at the agency, need to figure out ways to change their behaviors and their patterns. Now, I don't know if Snowden actually has epilepsy. He may, and it mentions it in the movie that he has epilepsy, so maybe he really does. But it certainly wasn't impacting him at that time the way that he claimed it was. And so what he had done is he used these medical appointments as his way to be able to download data, right? So if he had a medical appointment starting at 9 a.m., that would maybe take an hour or two, and it was probably down in Honolulu, and it was about a 40-minute drive getting back up to our facility. He gets up there, let's say, starts work at noon. That allows him to get a full workday, and he can work till 8 or 8:30. And really, after 5:30 or 6, it's kind of a ghost town in there, right? There's not very many people around, just like any other workspace in the world. And so it really gave him about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, even up to 3 hours, depending on the day, to be there more or less by himself without having prying eyes and without people asking questions, which then afforded him the ability to plug in thumb drives and download all that data. Had he plugged the thumb drive in the middle of the workday with people sitting all around, somebody would have noticed and called him out on it, and there would have been a pretty significant security impact there, right? And so what he'd done is he used his epilepsy as the excuse to be able to change his work habits and change his work times in order to do what he did. As we get closer to him leaving, about the weekend before he left, after a couple of weeks of this, he came to me again and he said, "Hey, Steve, the epilepsy just keeps getting worse. The doctors are really confused as why, and they want me to come in all day Monday and Tuesday of next week for medical tests. And if those medical tests go bad, I'm going to have to take some time off of work, and they're not going to let me drive, and they're not going to let me come into work." And so, again, I gave him my support. I hope it all works out. We'd hate to lose you. And he even expressed sympathy or I guess sorrow that, so to speak, as being kind of a new employee. So he kind of said, I know that I'm a new employee, and it always stinks when new employees cause these kind of problems. I really apologize about that. And, he was aware of what he was doing and the impact it was going to have on us. And so that Sunday, after we later learned, was the day that he flew to Hong Kong. And then Tuesday night, after his 2 days of, quote, medical tests, he emailed me. And he said, "Steve, the medical tests went really bad. I'm going to I'm going to have to take time off of work." And I should mention before that, on that Friday when we were, and one thing I did say is, hey, if you do need to take time off work, let's make sure we get in touch with HR and get the paperwork going for short-term disability. Let's make sure you get taken care of and get the money you need and deserve. And this is the only weird thing he ever said that kind of made me raise an eyebrow. But it wasn't the kind of eyebrow raising or anything that would cause me to make a logical leap from what he says to he's going to steal millions of documents and flee to Hong Kong and release them out to the world, right? What he said was, I've had this problem for a long time. I've missed work on it. I've got a big nest egg saved up already in savings. I'm just going to go on leave without pay. I really don't want to deal with short-term disability and all of that bureaucracy. I said, well, it's not really that much work. It's pretty easy, pretty quick process, and a little bit of paperwork, and you're leaving free money on the table, right? He said, well, even so, it's just kind of how I felt. I said, all right, well, whatever you want, that's fine. So when he emailed me on Tuesday night and said that the test went bad and he's going to have to take time off work, I replied and said, I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you get better soon. We're here to support you. Let me know what I can do. And please, let's get in touch with HR and get you that short-term disability. On Wednesday night, he emailed me back and he said, "Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate that. I'll get in touch with HR. I'll talk to you later." And that was the last time I ever heard from him. So over the next couple of weeks, Ed obviously didn't respond to any of my phone calls, any of my emails. I checked in on him a few times. He hadn't given me any information in terms of paperwork or doctor's notes or anything I could use to get the short-term disability going for him, since he wasn't taking care of it. And timesheets were coming due at the end of the month, right? And May 31st. So as the end of the month came, I contacted my boss out in Georgia and said, "Hey, Snowden isn't responding to anything. I'm really worried about him. But, also from an administrative standpoint, I'm not really sure how to handle this, right? Do I go and fill his timesheet out for him, et cetera, et cetera." So my boss gave me the advice I needed. And then he being, kind of saving my bacon a little bit, he actually reached out to NSA on that Friday, the last day of May, or one of the last days of May, and let them know that we had a person missing. Now, NSA, like most sensitive organizations, have a policy about people missing, right? If somebody doesn't show up for work, you have to start looking for them and inform the security team that day, that moment, right? There is no waiting a day or two to see if they show back up at a place like NSA when you're dealing with that level of security. Now, because Ed was on medical leave, it was a little bit different, right? There really wasn't any sort of requirement for us to inform them that he wasn't responding to things. In fact, my concern, it never even crossed my mind that he was going to do what he ended up doing, right? My concern was that something bad had happened to him. Maybe he had ignored the doctor's advice and was driving along some cliffside road in Hawaii and drove off the cliff and was lost in the ocean somewhere or something, or a little less dire than that. But I thought most likely was that maybe he flew home to Maryland, had gone off the grid for a little bit, and was just recovering with his family out in Maryland. So that's all I ever thought up until the day that he revealed himself to the world. And so on Monday of that next week, I got a call from NSA Security, and they said, hey, this is the folks in Hawaii. And they said, hey, Steve, and I knew these folks pretty well from managing my team and facilitating their clearances and getting their access to the agency and such. And so it was a pretty good relationship. They said, hey, Steve, we hear you got a guy missing. We know we don't normally get involved in medical issues like this when people are gone, but we're a pretty close-knit family here in Hawaii, and we want to help you look for him. Looking back and kind of thinking about that experience, to me, it's likely NSA Security may have known more than he was just out on medical leave, right? That I didn't know. Regardless, we spent that next week scouring the island for Snowden, whether it was trying to call him, email him. I drove by his house a couple times. We tried finding his girlfriend's phone number and getting in touch with her, and she didn't return any of the calls. We couldn't find her. I believe NSA Security maybe even reached out to his parents. I actually visited places that he was known to hang out, just trying to do our due diligence to try to find him. And again, it never crossed my mind that he was about to do what he did. Now, it was about Wednesday or Thursday of that week where the article that you see on the screen on the right from The Guardian was published. And, this particular article specifies that U.S. is secretly collecting private data from AOL, Apple, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Paltalk, Skype, Yahoo, and YouTube, right? Now, in the article, it's really guiding us and leading us to believe, and the Snowden's interpretation of this is that NSA is using that capability against the American people. And that's really where the big controversy came out. Now, in my experience there and others, that isn't really what NSA was doing at all with those capabilities at all. But that's what we were all led to believe. So as you can imagine, this sent shockwaves amidst all of us working at the agency, no matter where we were at. And over the next couple of days, we had two more articles come out, one from the Washington Post and one from a third publication. I don't remember where it was from, but continually just raising this craziness that we were dealing with and the shockwave through our organization. And so there were a lot of conversations about it. In fact, on Saturday of that week, I was out all week on leave. I was actually, my wife is out of town, so I was watching my boys. And so I was actually on leave while I was looking for Snowden. And for the first time that week, I'd been able to talk to one of my coworkers. We were good friends, went to church together, and our desks touched. He was a guy that worked for the Army, an Army sergeant major, an Army sergeant anyway. And we were chit-chatting, and he said, Steve, wouldn't it be crazy if Ed were the guy leaking all of this stuff? And I literally laughed, and I said, dude, there's no way Ed would do something like that. But man, if he did, it would be my absolute worst nightmare. Well, sure enough, fast forward to the next morning, I was sitting in a church meeting, kind of a leadership meeting, and I'd just gotten done telling all the folks in the meeting all about my crazy week and looking for Ed and how he gone missing, and then and how crazy it is that all this stuff was being leaked out to the media about NSA. And then I actually mentioned about my friend's comment, which I still didn't believe up to that time. And I had my thoughts during all that, and about 10 a.m. the meeting ends, and I walk out, and I turn my phone on, and my phone had blown up with missed phone calls and text messages. And it just so happens that the first text message I saw was from that friend of mine from the day before. And all the text message said was, sorry, man, looks like your worst nightmare came true. And I knew exactly what he meant. And I found an empty room in the church where I could be alone, and I just melted down. I lost it. I freaked out. And every sort of irrational thought one could have fell on my shoulders. It was ranging from things like, I'm going to be blamed for this. I'm going to get fired. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going to go to jail. I'm going to lose my family. To going to impact my employees, right? All my employees are going to get fired. Booz Allen's going to lose their government contracts, all the way up to the big macro stuff, geopolitical stuff too. NSA collection sites are going to get compromised. CIA black ops folks are going to get offed. Terrorists are going to run wild. China's going to take over the world. You name it. All this stuff just was dumping on my shoulders at this time, and I was panicking. I kind of got myself together enough to drive home, and my wife had just gotten back from Japan the day before. And I told her all about this, my crazy week. And I pulled her into our bedroom, and all I could do was cry on her shoulder and just say, it's him, over and over and over. But I got my wits about me after a few minutes and got back up on the horse. It was time to lead, right? And, we're all going to face those periods in our life when we face crisis, when something major happens. What really matters is how do we respond to it, and what are our values? And it's really in those circumstances where our values and our ethics really, really shine and come out. And one of the big lessons I learned from crisis management, for example, is how important taking care of your employees are. During that day, in the aftermath of all of that, I talked to all levels of Booz Allen leadership, NSA security and leadership and everything. But for whatever reason, I'm glad that I did this. I took the time to individually call all of my employees. I had 15 people that worked for me at the time. I called all of them and gave them the time they needed to talk. Now, most of them, because Snowden had only been our employee for a month and a half, had no idea, didn't really know the guy, right? They knew he was on our team, and they were shocked when all this came out. They barely knew him. So it was kind of they weren't all that distraught about it. But I had a couple employees, and particularly the lady from whom he was an employee referral, really struggled and really took it hard. And we spent quite a bit of time talking and working through things. And she was panicking and freaking out just as much as me. And I found that taking care of my people, the people that rely on me for their livelihood, was probably the best thing that I did over that day. So later that night, the call came that I was expecting, which came from NSA security. And they said, hey, Steve, we want to meet with you and FBI. Us and FBI want to meet with you tonight. Can you meet us down at the FBI offices at 6 p.m.? And so I say, sure. And I hop in my car and I drive down. This is points kind of where panic starts to set in, right? I've seen all the movies. I know what to expect, where I'm expecting to sit in this dark room. I got this big hot lamp shining on me, and I'm getting grilled and interrogated. And luckily, it wasn't anything like that. But it was 3 hours of asking multiple questions about what I knew about him, my relationship was, and a lot of the same questions over and over to see if my story was changing. It was a pretty stressful event. And luckily, those folks, the FBI and NSA folks, were pretty cool. It wasn't too brutal, but it was a stressful situation. And then to wrap the story up, the next day, I had to go into work, and it was really time to respond with the actual client that he worked for. We were contractors, right? We had clients that we were supporting. And I put my bag down. I beelined it straight to his direct government client. We worked for different teams. And, another big lesson I learned about crisis management is don't cast off blame. I had nothing to do with what Snowden did. I didn't help him plan it. I wasn't involved in it. I had no idea. I was as shocked as anybody else. But the last thing I was going to do was throw up my hands and say, hey, it's not my fault. Don't look at me, right? I went into the office of the team leadership there for the government. And I said, hey, this failure is on me. What can I do to make it better? And that really went a long way to smooth things over and to fix that relationship. And then later that day, I ended up meeting with the director of NSA Hawaii. And he really put it best. He said, Steve, you really got caught holding the hot potato when time ran out. He'd been planning this for a long time. He was going to do this regardless of who he worked for. He just happened to work for you. And that's really the way it worked out. And so from there, things evolved, things changed, right? But long story short, Snowden kind of became, through those actions that he took, kind of the stereotypical, or I guess the poster child, if you will, of insider threats. And that's what we're going to talk about now, is kind of what do we learn from my experience with Snowden and about insider threats, and how do we protect ourselves from it? So let's first talk about an insider threat profile. Now, this is how I've profiled Ed from an insider threat. And a lot of these and variants of these are really going to be pretty similar with all insiders, all malicious insiders, those folks who are planning something, they're doing something intentionally. So first of all, almost all insiders have some sort of have some sort of driving motivation for doing what they do. Ed's obviously he saw a significant need, a significant injustice being perpetrated on the American people from the American government. And this ties into his narcissism. And he also viewed it as, I see this injustice and I'm the only one that can right this injustice, that can bring enough attention to it. No one else can do it. I have to do it. And, in the interview that I had with Snowden, people have asked me before, did you see any sort of negative character traits? What was he like? Was there any red flags? And there really weren't any red flags. And I'd say I liked him a lot. He and I got along well. We had some really good conversations. I even think our personalities meshed fairly well. But one thing I did notice about Snowden from a negative standpoint was that he was very arrogant and very narcissistic. He was very, very confident in his skills and almost to the point of looking down on people. But that wasn't enough to make me not hire the guy, right? I wanted somebody who was confident and experienced and had some expertise. But I think that level of narcissism really drove him to do what he did. You'll also see, and as I touched on earlier, that insider threats often develop excuses for abnormal behavior because they have to change their behaviors in one form or another, especially if they didn't come in with an intention. Or they need to operate some different way, right? So they make up excuses. There's also often external influences. Now, for Snowden, his external influences were the media support. And there's even arguments and a little bit of research that's gone out there to suggest that there may have been third-party groups providing a little bit of solidarity and aid. There's some evidence out there that he may have been associated with the group Anonymous as early as 2004. And a lot of that's more of needs to be vetted out more, but it's possible there were other groups out there providing aid and support to some extent. And I'm not saying he was an asset of the Russians or the Chinese or anything like that, but more that there was a lot of times for Snowden, it looks like he had that media support, he had the aid. And then for other insiders, there's almost always some sort of family pressure, even if their spouse or somebody in the family isn't driving them or encouraging them to do what they did, they feel a pressure, whether it's financially or some other element, to need to do what they do in terms of doing damage from an insider standpoint, right? Then what's interesting about insiders also is that they learn how to exploit technologies. It's amazing how many insiders are really not all that technical, but yet when they have a motivating purpose and a drive, they almost very quickly become technology experts and are able to exploit various security weaknesses, or build or figure out how to build a piece of software or something that can help them exploit something or whatnot. And so they'll take advantage of those things. What we'll also find is that insiders will be very diligent in understanding what security protocols are in place and what's being, from the policy standpoint, what's being enforced and what's not, and we'll take advantage of those. For example, with Snowden, right? Granted, he was very technical, so it made it a lot easier for him. But, NSA, like every other government organization, has this rule that says thou shalt not use thumb drives. Yet, Snowden was able to download all this data by using a thumb drive, right? Obviously, the NSA had a security policy in place, but that security policy wasn't very well enforced. And because Snowden had the expertise and figured it out, he was able to exploit that weakness within NSA security and enable them to do what he did, right? So it's important that as organizations and we build insider threat programs, that we're taking these things into consideration and we're working with the security team to ensure that, yes, if we have these certain policies, that those policies are being enforced, right? Now, as we talk about building an insider security program, one thing I want to caveat and mention is that we have to walk a fine line, because we don't want to build a culture of mistrust. We don't want the people to feel like they're constantly being spied on all the time and it's all strict and it's all work, no play kind of a thing, right? All of us want a culture that that people will enjoy. We'll want them to work there and all that. So it's important to balance respecting your employees' privacy with the security, and that's a very fine line. And there are ways to do it simply by maybe tracking IP addresses and computers and looking for network and behaviors on the network. That if you see behaviors that are abnormal or things you're concerned about, then you can go find out who's behind it, rather than spying on each individual person all the time, right? So there are some things you can look at. But we're going to talk now about some of the solutions we can employ to help protect ourselves. All right. So first, we talked about security policies, right, and enforcing them. Now, security policies are a lot of organizations do a good job with security policies. And the reason for that is when it comes to compliance, it comes to things like the NIST framework or PCI or SOC 2 Type 2 or whatever different things we need to be compliant for, a lot of them require you to have certain policies, right? And in order to pass those compliance audits, you have to demonstrate those policies and then demonstrate how they're enforced, even if they're not really enforced all that well, right? So obviously, we want to develop smart security policies, and I encourage all organizations to develop an insider threat policy. What is it kind of ties into acceptable behavior and acceptable use of IT devices, and incorporates the security parameters by which we're going to detect and monitor our employees. And then we want to train our workforce. Now, we talked about the ignorant and careless. Now, 66% of data breaches occur because of phishing and social engineering. That is as much an issue of training as much as anything else, right? Now, we can go in and we can go out and buy security solutions for email that will help block a huge portion of phishing emails and prevent URLs from being embedded, or will review attachments, et cetera. But hackers are innovative, and they're always changing. They'll find ways to get around a lot of that. And from my experience, my time consulting and working in cybersecurity, I found that simple training is the #1 best way to decrease the amount of folks clicking on bad emails and decrease that risk for an organization from a phishing standpoint. And so let's say if you can decrease that 66% of data breaches in your organization occurring because of phishing down to 30%, you have made a significant impact. And those are metrics you can go back to your leadership, your organization, and say, this is the impact we're having. We've gone out, we've run a couple of phishing tests. We've shown, the first time we did a fake phishing email that went out to the organization, we had a 20% click rate. This is the third time we've done it now, and this third time we only had a 5% click rate. We're seeing huge improvements. This is great for our security, and we're in a lot better place. And those would not only improve your security and make you more robust, but it also makes you look good and gives you, you're doing your job, and those are metrics you can use to report up, right? So train your workforce. When we talk about training, it needs to be, my recommendation to organizations is to conduct a training monthly, or some sort of awareness. It doesn't have to be a training. It doesn't have to be boring where somebody gets up and yaps for 50 minutes and bores everybody to death. It can be a fake phishing email. It can be an online interactive training, kind of like what the government does a lot. You can do, you can have a cybersecurity newsletter that goes out that includes a little phishing reminder in it. There's a variety of different options you can take. You can go out and hire a speaker to come in and give a presentation about insider threats and security and phishing, or whatever it may be. And then also take advantage of October National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. The government and like US CERT and other organizations give out some great resources for that. I would suggest you plan a weekly event or something to kind of make it a big deal, put up little placards around the environment, et cetera, but do things to make October in particular, as well as throughout the year, a focus on cybersecurity to raise awareness. And then finally, as I mentioned earlier, enforce the policies, right? If you're going to have policies in place, if you're going to say thou shalt not use thumb drives, then make it possible to enforce that policy, right? Disable the thumb drive or the USB drives, or even, and probably would have been more effective for the agency, would be to physically disable them, right? Whether it's if jamming a screwdriver in there and making them unusable, disconnecting them, removing them, or whatever it may be, right? Do those sorts of things. So enforcing your policies are very, very important. It's great to have them, but policies aren't worth the paper they're written on if you're not enforcing them. The next is separation of duties. Now, this is an interesting one that I think one of the ways in which Snowden bit the agency. Now, Snowden, as I mentioned at the beginning, was an IT admin. He worked as a systems administrator. And then he left their organization on a Friday and joined my organization on the intelligence side of the house on a Monday. Now, I don't know this for sure, but it seems probable that Snowden didn't have his IT admin rights withdrawn that day that he left, that it may have taken a few days after he joined my team, and that may have been what allowed him to get on his computer. And if the agency did have, if they had it thumb drives logically turned off, that he may have been able to turn those on and take other administrative actions, right? He basically, for a couple of days, may have had keys to the kingdom, both having administrative rights to the network as well as the intelligence analyst type rights and accesses that he got when he joined my team. And so separation of duties is critical. And the example I like to give is your IT admin and your accountant, right? Your IT admin is going to be managing all of the systems on your network, and they're going to have access to the databases and the servers that are hosting all of your financial data. But those IT admins don't have the right or the privileges to be able to view and edit that data without permission, right? And because they risk ruining the financials and making them inaccurate and doing significant harm to the organization because they don't know what they're doing. And in the same vein, your accountant doesn't have the admin privileges on the databases on the computer and other systems to be able to make changes to the system or the network or anything like that, because heaven forbid they do something wrong because they're not trained for it and cause that database to crash or cause a network to collapse or whatever it may be, right? So organizations purposely and smartly perform separation of duties by keeping roles and responsibilities siloed so that to protect against insider threats and also to ensure that things don't break. And so if you're not doing this today, I highly recommend you apply separation of duties. And this is one of the areas that may have had an impact in preventing Snowden if it is the case that NSA didn't revoke his admin privileges the day that he left the IT side, may have at least limited the damage a little bit from what he was going to do, what he ended up doing. The next area is security operations and monitoring, right? So when I go in and I do my consult with organizations, one of the first questions I ask is, how do you know if you're hacked, right? How do you identify these things? Security operations is how we know if we're hacked generally, because unfortunately, too many times when I ask that question, organizations' answers and their responses to me is essentially are asking or say, well, if, usually something breaks, and so somebody calls the help desk, and that's how we know. Or, well, we bought a SIM tool, and we have a few logs going in, so that will give us the occasional alert. But usually, those aren't managed very well, right? They have a little bit of security monitoring, but not near enough. But what security operations does is it allows you to have visibility into what's occurring on your network, right? You can begin to detect things like data exfiltration or unauthorized system accesses or elevation of privileges, which is what Snowden probably used to do some of the things he did, or the use of removable media, right? How come, with NSA being so concerned about security, why when Snowden plugged in a thumb drive, didn't alarm bells go off on the SOC at NSA saying, hey, somebody's using a thumb drive? Or when he's downloading huge amounts of data off of the internal network onto his computer or thumb drive, wasn't that picked up? Why weren't those rules in place, right? So there's certain alerts you can build to help detect those things. Even more effective is behavioral analytics, right? Can we apply a level of analytics against our users that baseline their activities and their behaviors, right? If we know that a particular user accesses particular databases or even their own system at certain times of day most often, or from certain computers, certain IP addresses, and then that changes, we generate alerts off of that and say, hey, well, here's an anomaly. Here's something we don't see before. For example, one of the things that's been reported in the Snowden investigation is that he had socially engineered a colleague of ours to give him their password. And apparently he used that username and password to access a couple systems he shouldn't have had access to. Perhaps with behavioral analytics, it's possible that having baselined the original user's activity coming from a certain IP in certain systems and all of a sudden seeing it coming from a different IP abnormally could have potentially generated an alert, right? And so having some level of security detection, monitoring, and detection that layers on top of that behavioral analytics and even an element of machine learning and anomaly detection can go a long way. In fact, that's the organization that I work for. That's kind of our bread and butter of what we do. So we encourage all organizations at the least employ some sort of SIM technology, which can get pretty cumbersome to manage on your own. So either kind of employ your own SIM technology, have your own internal SOC, or go with an MSSP who can help, has the expertise already built in to help with that monitoring and make sure that their use cases are in place to help detect insider threats as well. And also, as you're sending information to your SIM and use cases, too many organizations are mostly concerned with the east-west traffic, which means you're going from the outside the internet in or inside your network out to the internet. But we also want to send internal to internal data because that's where we can apply analytics on top of that to be able to look for insider threat type things, including endpoint protection software. Those logs can be sent to your SIM as well and generate alerts. By the way, if at any point you have any questions on this or other things I'm about to present, don't hesitate to ask them. There is a Q&A button on your screen there that you can click and ask questions, and we'll address questions in a few minutes here. All right. And the last one is data classification and DLP. Right now, obviously, NSA is going to have this in place pretty well. But from an insider threat standpoint, this can go a long way to providing you a lot of security. Right, you're going to have you have information and data in your network that you care about, that are it's really important, kind of your crown jewels. If you're an R&D company, it's going to be your CAD files, your research, all of your findings that really make you unique in the marketplace. Whatever it is that are your crown jewels, you want to have that stuff classified, whatever you call it, top secret or confidential or whatever, right? But maybe your marketing stuff, the stuff you put on the website, that's all still your internal data, but you might classify that as public. You don't really care if people are taking screenshots or downloading stuff or white papers or whatever off your network. Then you have other data kind of in between that you want to control. So employing a data classification solution and classifying all of your data can be really effective. And then layering on top of that a data loss prevention software that can monitor where those files are moving across the network and when they're edited. And in fact, there's even some DLP solutions out there that will prevent you from copying a segment or a document out of a confidential file and pasting it into an email. There's software that will prevent you from uploading things to Dropbox or Google Drive or whatever unauthorized file sharing software there are, right? Now, obviously, the cloud and O365 or OneDrive or Google Drive or whatever, you're going to have file sharing solutions that are authorized, and you're going to want to whitelist those from your DLP. Those are great, but you want to have data access controls and data loss prevention controls for things that are unauthorized, right? So think about solutions for data classification, data access controls, work on preventing unauthorized online file sharing, et cetera, et cetera. So those are some of the primary solutions. So just a few things. There's so many things we can do from an insider threat program to help develop and secure your environment and try to protect yourself as much as possible from insider threats. And granted, you're not going to be able to protect yourself from every insider threat, just like you can't protect yourself from every hacker, right? Somebody with the motivation will find a way to do some damage. What we're trying to do is we're trying to decrease both the likelihood of it happening as well as the impact it has on your organization if it happens. And going back to security monitoring piece right over here, just briefly touching on this, one of the big things we see in cybersecurity is this concept of dwell time or time to detection. So many organizations, when they're hacked, have hackers sitting on their network anywhere from 4 to 6 months, if not longer. I mean, the Marriott breach that was announced back in December reported that the hackers may have had access to Marriott's network for up to 4 years. Think about how much data is being stolen, how much money that's costing. In fact, one study that I read suggested that up to every month hackers sit on your network is up to $1 million in revenue that's costing your organization. So the sooner you can detect an insider threat or a data breach or whatever it is, the better off you're going to be, both because you're going to lose less data and it hopefully should cost you less money to do the IR and to recover from it overall, right? So that's where a lot of these solutions are really designed to decrease hacker dwell time as well as to decrease the amount of time an insider is able to do damage to your organization. Because some insiders will sit there for a long time, especially the financial folks, and will try to siphon off money as much as possible, right? So, so that's all I've got. If you have any questions, please, if you have any questions, please post them and ask them in the Q&A box. If you're interested, you're welcome to reach out to me or contact me or add me on LinkedIn. My contact information is there on the screen. So feel free to reach out and give me feedback. I do love to get feedback on and ways we can improve, but welcome anything you have. So I'm going to pause here. And Amir, do you want me to address the questions or do you want to kind of go with it?
No problem, Stephen. I can go ahead and give you these questions.
Great.
I have a couple here for you. Let's see, our first question here is your organization allowed to actually confirm medical appointments with the doctor? And what about holding passports or flagging unexpected international departures of your staff?
So that's good question. So no, I don't believe that we do have that right to confirm medical appointments because of the patient doctor privilege, right? But so what I've learned is when they're going on short-term disability, you can require a doctor's note of some sort, right? And so I can't confirm medical appointments, and even now I wouldn't. Even if I could, that's probably not something I would do because I don't want my employees feeling like I have this culture of distrust, and I'm questioning everything they do. Yes, I'm a little more jaded. I'm a little bit more cynical than I used to be because of my experience, but I still want to maintain that. And so if they have to take a sick day, they want to take a day off to get better or whatever, I usually don't require a medical note or any sort of confirmation. But if there's going to be substantial time taken, then yeah, absolutely, they need to provide some sort of doctor's note or something to get short-term disability or leave without pay or whatever it is that's in place. About the other part of it, holding passports or flagging unexpected international departures of staff, that's really only something I've seen the government do, and maybe I haven't heard of it, but it's possible some of the big companies who deal in really sensitive things, maybe even work with the government, may do that for select employees. But again, I'm not even sure if that's legal, or if it is, I'm not sure that's something you really even want to do. Again, from a culture standpoint, it doesn't seem very kosher. But I know that NSA, for instance, they don't necessarily hold passports, but I do believe. Again, I haven't had this confirmed. But I do believe they have an element of monitoring flights in that regard, but I'm not 100% on that. Okay, next question.
All right, great. Here's our next question. Do you think that when people change jobs or start new positions, that is when opportunities are exploited and because of human desire not to seem insensitive?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most dangerous times is when people change jobs and start new positions, right? We talked about early on, we talked to part employees. All of us, when we move to a new position, we want to make a good first impression. We want a good job. And I think we're all a little bit nervous. This job might be a little stretch for me. How can I be successful? And so I think we do begin to look for opportunity to exploit it. But I think we also do see insider threats later on as well, especially from the disgruntled side if something happens. Or if after a period of time working there, they see cracks or they see holes or they see some way to exploit within the environment, some sort of hole they can exploit to make it successful. Some way for they think, hey, there's a surefire way for maybe me to steal a little bit of money or take this data without ever getting busted. I think that does occur as well.
Okay.
Is there anything else?
Another question? Yeah, sure we go. What would be the single most valuable cybersecurity solution for detecting or preventing an insider threat?
Oh, man. Well, I would suggest, it's hard to say the single most valuable. Obviously, if it's from an insider threat from a trusted employee standpoint where they're not doing it maliciously, I already touched on, I think training is the most important. But obviously, training and policy enforcement isn't going to do a whole lot with your malicious insiders. Probably from a data loss standpoint, I would say either security monitoring detection, like having a SOC in place, maybe an MSSP or something that has use cases that can help detect it. Either that, would kind of be 1A, and then 1B would be a robust DLP program that can at least, and with data classification, that can kind of help keep data from being copied out and all that. But again, those can even be exploited pretty heavily as well. But that's probably, and then the other area that I might say kind of tied to that, and kind of getting past the single part of that, right? But I'd probably kind of say having controls on your firewalls, your routers, whatever that or your network that prevents access to unauthorized file sharing, right? So don't prevent access to Google Drive, OneDrive, Dropbox, whatever it may be for people to be able to upload things to, or don't allow Gmail use internally if you can avoid it, or if you do have your DLP or your email security, prevent things from being pasted into it or whatnot, those sorts of things. So, yep. Is there anything else?
Well, unfortunately, we have run out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to thank Stephen Bay, our speaker, for this informative presentation. And a special thank you to our audience for taking the time to attend as well as participate, and all those who have registered and possibly will listen a little bit later. Thank you to our host, IEEE Computer Society. Have a great day.